What's happening? Welcome to the 31st episode of the Slapstream with Djordje, live from Slapsville. And today I have a very special guest, as always, but I think that this time is really special. I had to dig deep for this one. I've been a fan of Danny Gatton and his bass player for a long time, since I discovered rockabilly pretty much. And then when I discovered jazz and all of these styles mixed up in my head. And then I was really happy to find somebody like Danny and his bass player, John, who's going to join us a little bit in a moment. And I found out how you can actually blend all these American styles, from rockabilly and blues and country. And you really do not have to fit in just one genre. And before I introduce him, I would like to remind you, please subscribe to my channel. I had, I guess over 30 bass players that I featured on the Art of Slap Bass and the Slapstream. And if you'd like to support the channel, please check out the links in the description, PayPal, Venmo, and Patreon. And I would like to give a shout out to all the Patreons, all the new Patreons, and really appreciate that. Thanks so much. And without further ado, I would like to introduce John Previti.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome. Welcome to Slapsville.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. How are you? How do you feel during these crazy times that we cannot control?
Yeah, I'm okay. Everything's fine. I get to go playing a little bit and teaching and staying pretty healthy, I guess. So
that's the most important. Do you teach online, or you still teach in those two schools that I noticed that you usually teach?
Landon, it's a private school in Bethesda, so it's all online now. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hopefully we're gonna get back to normal and after this vaccine, after we're all able to get the vaccine. We've been talking about, everybody I guess is talking about it. We all miss playing. How are things you're in Maryland, right?
Correct.
Yeah. How are things in Maryland? Is it strict lockdown or
it's not
getting a little looser?
It depends what county. I'm in Montgomery County. It's not so bad. There's still some places that are closed, and but it's not so bad. Not like some other states, I don't think. When I go south, I'm in Montgomery County. I'm from Prince George's County. When I go there a little bit south, it's some places are closed. It's hard to find a restaurant sometimes if you want to eat out somewhere. So, but it's not too strict. Governor Hogan's doing a pretty good job, I think. So.
And have you been doing any live shows or any live streams or anything online related except lessons?
Yeah, I've done a few things for Blues Alley, which is a very well-known jazz club in DC. Harry Schnipper, the owner, has been doing some live streams. So I've done a few of those with Dave Chapler, great guitar player. And did something just before Christmas at Asparagus Studio. And I did something with Big Joe Mayer. Maybe you've heard of Big Joe. He and I and Jimmy Stephenson did a little Christmas show. So that was nice.
I'm glad you're keeping busy, but I still would prefer to see you in person and play live and slap your bass. Hopefully, let's start with my regular questions. I'm interested to hear how did you start playing music and when?
Well, I started on oboe, believe it or not, back in elementary school, and played that till 9th grade. But by 10th grade, I started listening to Jack Bruce with Cream, and he's still a hero of mine. and James Jamerson doing the Motown stuff. And so I started on electric. And I still play electric too. I think Jack Bruce is probably the guy that made me feel like I wanted to play bass. And we all like guitar players, and that's cool too. But he was an expressive player, very powerful. And then a couple of years after I started going to college, I discovered Charles Mingus, and he influenced me even more. And then I found out that Jack Bruce was a big fan of Mingus too. So I guess there was something there. So by 1970, I started playing guitar and having friends show me stuff. And I guess I was in my first band by 1970. I've been playing a little while. And a couple of years later, started studying upright. Had a great teacher, Paul Simonelli, over at the community college. And yeah, that's what happened. I just always loved music, always loved hearing it. And
you play all these different styles. Do you consider yourself a jazzer or classical musician, rockabilly, or just a musician?
I just play. I'm certainly not a classical player. I mean, I can play some things. When I teach my students, we do classical material a lot of times, but I like to show them slap and jazz too. I think the people that influenced me when someone like Danny and people that influenced him, they just played music. I remember Danny telling me that when he was coming up, it didn't matter what kind of band you were in, you had to be able to play everything. If you're in a country band, you still had to play standards, whatever's on the top 40, and that went for everybody. So all my real heroes, they're not, like Hank Williams makes me happy, and so does Duke Ellington and Bob Wills and Johnny Cash. It just all knocks me out. I think it's all the same thing. I really don't think there's a difference between different kinds of music.
I completely agree with you. I come from what's politically considered Eastern Europe, and then I got lots of influence, from Romani people, from the Balkan music, all the odd time signatures. But my first love was rockabilly, and that's kind of how I discovered upright and everything. And I completely share passion with you about the Charlie Mingus as well.
Oh yeah, and he's a good slap player too.
He was, yeah. He played the slap in Jelly Roll Morton Soul. Yeah. I think that was the song that he used. Yeah. I consider slap always a jazz technique. I'm always surprised to hear when modern jazz guys don't want to play, that they consider that kind of just really old-fashioned way. But I think that it could be used in a more contemporary styles as well.
Certainly, you can be funky. It works great with Latin stuff, especially if you don't have a drummer. I do a lot of gigs with no drums, and I might just slap all night. Just not trying to make up for the drums, but to just give it a little kick. But people like Pops Foster and Milt Hinton. I still think Milt Hinton's the greatest. They slapped just so they could be heard, and I try to remember that. I admit that playing through an amp, when I'm slapping through an amplifier, it's not my favorite. I'd rather work to be heard than have the amp if I'm going to slap, but I still do it if I have to.
So you prefer to play slap acoustically rather than with an amp?
I would rather if I had my choice.
Okay.
And I mean, I do a lot of gigs where I can play either without an amp or minimally amplified. It just sounds better. I use gut strings. My D and G are gut, and it just sounds so great, that way. And I like using it to accompany too, as well as solo on it. But it's a very swingy. It swings like crazy. You can really make
Okay,
slap.
absolutely, absolutely. But what do you think? What is the reason why jazz guys, I mean, really for last 50 years, kind of avoid playing slap?
I can't think of a reason. I guess it's not cool. I mean, you can't. I mean, starting with someone like Ron Carter, who's a great musician. As far as I know, he doesn't slap. I mean, he might, but turns out Ray Brown was a good slap player. I saw him doing a lesson online, and he demonstrated he sounded great. But he would be a little bit older. I'm not sure. I think people wanted to get that Ron Carter sound with a lot of sustain and growl, which is wonderful. And I don't know. They just started going a different way. They wanted to have more, play more like guitar players, which is also great. But I think with the advent of more amplification, that probably had something to do with it. You know, they didn't need to work so hard to be heard, so they could relax a little bit. But it's hard to say.
I kind of feel that, once Jimmy Blanton joined Duke Ellington's band, that everybody stopped slapping, which I believe it was 1939. Which, funny enough, it was also the year when Milt Hinton that you mentioned recorded "Plucking the Bass," which I think is one of the masterpieces of for slap style of playing upright. And even I love Jimmy Blanton, but I always because of that guy, everybody stopped slapping in jazz, at least.
Yeah, I mean, he probably did slap, but we just didn't hear it.
Jimmy Blanton did one recording that I'm familiar with. It's called a sepia panorama, and then his slap is heard on that one. It's not very prominent, but he knew how to slap. And Ray Brown, as you mentioned, but I feel that Ray Brown was making a little bit of a joke, when he was demonstrating slap in that instructional video that you mentioned. It's available on YouTube, so our you can see that. But he sounded great, and I know that he showed great appreciation for slap. Just introducing Milt Hinton on that. I think it's called "The Art of Playing Bass." When Milt Hinton is, so I guess he really appreciated Milt. I mean, everybody should.
Well, and Mingus was a big Milt fan. Milt Hinton talks about being in an apartment or a room somewhere and practicing, and he heard a guy upstairs playing everything that he played. And after a while, he met him, and it turned out it was Mingus. So Mingus was listening to Milt and learning from him. And when he wrote his book, Beneath the Underdog, he signed it to Milt, said, "To my teacher, Milt Hinton."
Oh, I love that book. I love that book.
That's
very interesting. Yeah, it's definitely something. Yeah, it's different. Not something that you would expect. But I guess from Mingus you can expect anything. So
yeah, I agree.
That's it. I would like to get back to your career. Do you remember when did you start playing in the bands? What was your first band?
I was talking with a friend yesterday about this. I had a friend down the street. His name was Warren Hartzell, and he wrote his own music, and he taught me a lot about just where the notes were on the bass, and so some of my first performing was with him, who was a songwriter, and other people that wrote tunes. The first band I was in high school, like around 1970 or 71. And we're doing FM, what we called FM material, Jethro Tull and Traffic and some Beatles stuff. And I was playing, of course, all bass guitar then. So, we had something we called Teen Club, and it was dances, and you'd get paid for it, and it'd be at different schools. And it was a great way to learn how to play and play with one another, So play all around the area. So anyway, since 70 or 71, So about 50 years now.
And that was that like a rock band, or was it a jazz band, or what was it?
Well, this was electric. It was whatever was happening then. Like I said, some Jethro Tull and
Uh-huh.
Traffic stuff, and a little bit of Cream, Rolling Stones, and that kind of stuff, you know.
So you went from oboe, like straight to electric, and you said you played a little guitar. Do you play any other instruments?
No, just really upright and electric, and I might play guitar around the house, but I'm not. I can play some chords and some scales, but I'm not really a guitar player.
Yeah. Okay. uh, we talked about a little bit before the show about this. Like, how did you get interested in slap bass?
Well, I don't know that I ever thought I'd be a slap player. And like I mentioned to you, I was on the road with Danny someplace, and he obviously I had my upright with me. So it was in the mid 80s. I didn't always play upright with him until later. And he just said, "Hey, let me show you how to play the slap." So he did. If you don't mind, I'll grab my bass. And when Danny taught me, I'm going to back up a little bit. He had me bend my finger and play kind of straight on like this, you know, like that. And then, so that's how I played for years. And then some years later, I got to know a great bass player named Jeff Sarley. And Jeff lived in Annapolis and played with Big Joe Mayer, and later on played with Keith Richards and Levon Helm. A great electric and upright player. And I'd always liked Willie Dixon, but I'd never, seen pictures of him. And Jeff said, "Well, I'm going to have to move the thing down." He said, "Willie kind of plays more like this." Well, that's where I played anyway. When I played pizzicato, and he just reached behind the string. For me, it's a more swingy. It swings a little harder. You can get that. I mean, you can do it any technique, but for me, it seemed to fit with my technique. And you can get a nice 2 and 4. You know that. So you really not even slapping that much. You're just pulling on it. So anyway, Danny. My phone's going nuts. The thing about Danny was he was a really great friend, a great mentor, but the way I really learned how to slap was on the gig. I might practice a little bit at home, and then he'd give me a solo at some concert, and I'd barely get through the first solo, and he'd say, "Do it again." And he'd make me play another chorus, and it almost killed me. And I'd get real mad, and he'd say, "You sure play good when you're mad." But that's how I learned to play under fire, And so I really learned a lot of this on the fly, just figuring out how to make it work. And we were a pretty loud band, so I was pretty heavily amplified. I had an SVT at one point. And but anyway, Danny's the guy that he's the one that taught me how to play. He's a very good bass player. Slapped on the upright, a great electric player, and he played like a bass player. And so I learned a lot about bass lines from him because he loved organ trios. So he showed me a lot of stuff like what organ players would do with the pedals and the left hand. So that was a huge influence on me, that sort of thing.
I bet. And you were playing with him for 18 years?
Yeah, I started in December 27th, 1976. I remember the date. It's also my anniversary. And so that's getting to be, what's that, 45 years ago now. And so I was 22. You know everything when you're 22. And so I thought. And then I played with them for about a year and a few months. And then I wanted to go study. So I left the band and went up north to Madison, Wisconsin. I thought I was going to study with Richard Davis, a great player. And I never got to meet him, although we wrote letters. Back then we wrote letters. And I saw him do a concert, and I freelanced up there. And then I came home. And by 1982, I was really starting to freelance, starting around 1979, 1980. And around 1981 or 82, I just called up Danny. I knew he was back in town. He was traveling too. He was playing with other people, Roger Miller and all that sort of thing. And I said, man, I'm playing some gigs. Why don't you come play? So we just did some jazz gigs with other people and just had a good time. It was real low key, and we really enjoyed it a lot. And so anyway, I played with him until he passed in 1994. Yeah.
So you called him, like, so that's how you guys started playing again in 82. So you called him and he joined you, and then I guess that's when you started doing all the rockabilly stuff.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point, because the first year I played with him, obviously I played electric, and we did some rockabilly, but we just played everything, and it seems like when we did our first album by 1991, we were doing even more rockabilly, and so it just, of course, we did the Elvis medley, and we would do the guy that did Bebopalula, and I just forgot his name, but Jimmy
Vincent.
Jimmy Vincent, yeah. Even though they had a bass guitar player with a mute on the bass, but in any case, it works. And so, I just never knew when he'd go into something, and I'd have to be able to play. All I did was watch him when I played. I never looked at the audience. I just kept my eye on him. And so that maybe his eyebrow would go up and you knew something was going to happen. We never rehearsed, unless we were doing a record. If we were recording, we'd go over some stuff. But 99% of what I learned, I learned on stage.
And you said when was the first record that you guys did together?
Well, the first record I did with him was in 1978, Redneck Tralles, and I was playing my Ripper fretless on that, and I still have that. And then we did Unfinished Business around 86. That was the next one, and then we did one for Elektra, 88 Elmira Street, and then we did another one for Elektra and Cruise and Deuces, and we did Relentless with Joey DeFrancesco on B3. I'm on a few of those too. But anyway, 1978 is when I started recording with him.
And you mentioned that you played rockabilly. I guess like you started playing rockabilly with him in the 70s on the electric, and then you switched to upright and started playing slap. During that time, have you seen anyone else like playing slap?
During that period?
Yes.
No. I mean, like I said, I met Jeff Sarley, but that would have been early 90s, I didn't meet Jeff, and he was wonderful. I didn't know anyone personally. I knew about Milt Hinton, but I didn't know anyone that was slapping. I remember every once in a while I'd see an older guy that he didn't really slap, but he might have pulled the strings rather than play the pizzicato that we're used to like this. Sorry. They might have pulled the string, but no, I didn't know any slap guys. So yeah, and then Stray Cats came out, but that was, I had already been with Danny for years before they came out. So
How did you guys feel about the Stray Cats and all that rockabilly movement that was happening in the early 80s?
We didn't really talk about it. I know Danny mentioned that Setzer used to come see him play I think when he was with Robert Gordon. I'm not sure if they met or he just knew he recognized him. I respect, Setzer's a great player. That's all I'll say about that.
For me, whenever I look at any kind of footage from your shows with Danny Gatton, it seems that they were mostly clubs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and was the rockabilly crowd into it, or was mostly like a regular people or a jazz crowd? Who would come to the shows?
Well, people came to, if you were a Danny fan, it meant you were just ready for whatever he would do. You were just, and it was maybe sad, but he was he was hard to categorize. And some people think that's why he didn't get more famous, because you couldn't stick him in a box. But no, if people came to see Danny, they wanted to hear him do whatever he pulled out, But everything he played sounded like that was the only thing he did. You know what I mean? And his rockabilly, I think, is unsurpassed, and everything. We did a whole lot of Bill Doggett stuff. A lot of organ trio things, jazz. You just never knew Les Paul, and he just never knew what was going to happen. So it was pretty amazing.
What would you say? What was the highlight for you of that band with Danny Gatton?
Well, there's a lot of stuff. I think when we started recording for Elektra, I remember telling Danny that, it wasn't about, hey, we were going to be stars, but I thought that what it meant was that we could work a lot. We'd be able to put out a product and have a record label behind us, and that was a big deal. But it was more of a subtle thing. You know what I mean? It just felt real solid. Say, okay, we can work hard and travel some and get more people hearing us. It wasn't glamorous. We didn't feel like it was a glamorous thing or we were rock stars. It was just an opportunity to work. But I do remember playing for Les Paul's birthday party up in New York some years before that we made the record with Elektra. And that was a big deal because there were it was kind of cool to see Danny playing, and Eddie Van Halen was there and David Gilmour, and just so that they could see Danny play, And Les Paul was really neat. It was cool to get to meet him, just to talk with him, and stuff like that was really neat. Playing in New York the first time, I was so nervous. I couldn't stand it. But it didn't matter. Nobody looked at me or anyone else. They just looked at Danny. He's smoking a cigarette or tuning up, and they all looked at him. So I could have burst into flames. Nobody would have noticed, for good reason. So that was kind of cool. But I don't know, the thing about Danny being so authentic and such a powerful musician, it didn't matter where we were. It was kind of a big deal. You know what I mean? It sounds corny, but it was really like that. He just brought that with him. So it kind of didn't matter. if you're playing a big festival or in some dump someplace. It just always felt right. So that's what worked for me.
That's amazing to hear. Besides Danny, I would like to mention some other amazing musicians that you played with. I know that you played with Ellis as well, right? And then you recorded with him.
Well, yeah, through a great guitar player in DC named Steve Abshire. In fact, I live a couple of blocks from where he grew up. He was with the Navy Commodores for years. Wonderful player, and he and Herb Ellis were very good friends. In fact, I think Herb Ellis was the godfather of one of his kids, and so I got to do I sat in on a gig. It was just the two of them playing, and Steve invited me, and that was really astonishing. Herb Ellis is so wonderful. And then when Steve did his album, Herb was on one of the tunes. So yeah, we got to play a little bit. And, I'd see him once in a while. I remember being at I don't know if you've ever gone to a NAMM show, but the last one I went to was in Nashville. And of course, you got all these great players. Everybody's playing a whole lot of stuff, lots and lots of notes. And it gets to be a bit much. And I was wandering around, and back in the Aria booth, way in the back, Herb was playing a duo with another guitar player. And it was so refreshing, And I waited for them to be done, and I said hi to them. And Danny happened to walk up just at that point, and I got to introduce them. And Danny was so knocked out. The thing about Danny was so appreciative of what other people did, famous or not. He didn't care. He was so appreciative, and he just told her, "Oh, I've always loved you, man. I've always wanted to meet you." And it was just nice. They talked for a couple of minutes, but that was kind of a highlight. And so, yeah, that was cool getting to play with them. I don't want to cuss or anything, but we were doing this tune with Herb. I used to really play in front of the beat and rush a little bit too, sadly. And we were doing this tune, Big Brass Bed Blues, with Steve Abshire. And I think it started with the bass, and it was real slow and groovy, and I kept speeding it up. And after like the 12th or 13th take, he said, "Quit rushing, motherfucker." And it was so funny. And I just started laughing. He was a great musician, real funny, real smart.
Wow.
I'm sorry to cuss. I hope you can edit that out. But and it was talking about, I remember telling the engineer, I said, "Hey, don't give me too much compression. You'll make me sound like Ron Carter." And Herb says, "Ron Carter? I'd rather you sound like Jimmy Carter." With all due respect to Ron, who was one of my heroes. But anyway, he's a funny guy.
Those are great stories.
I only managed to cuss on your show. I hope everyone's happy. But,
yeah. It's interesting. I think that I built like a crowd that really appreciates different genres. I had like a fair amount of rockabilly or psychobilly people, and then a fair amount of jazz guys, that are, doing something different, and also like experimental music also can have like some cool slap bass. So I'm just trying to present it and save it from, disappearance.
Oh yeah.
But I always thought it's the coolest, way like to play upright bass, and then we get a chance to play with all these amazing musicians as bass players. So that's just like icing on the cake. And you also played with Paul Simon, right?
Yeah.
How was that?
Through Danny, I met Arlen Roth, great musician and a wonderful guy.
That's the guy that had like a guitar company for instructional videos, right? Yeah, okay. I think that Danny did a couple for him.
Right. And Arlen, of course, had played with Simon and Garfunkel for different periods of his career. And this is after Danny passed. I guess it was that summer. I can't remember, spring or summer. Arlen called me and said, well, Paul Simon's working on this thing and he wants, this is what Arlen said, he wants Danny's rhythm section. So he got me, Shannon Ford on drums, and Bill Holloman played, I guess he played some saxophone. I can't remember now. So we went up there and Paul Simon was working on a musical called The Cape Man or Cape Man. It's based on a true story. And so basically we recorded, we were kind of rehearsing. He wanted a rehearsal tape for the people in the show, but he was going to save it too for a record, I suppose. And it was kind of neat, you know, because I got to watch him write a song before my very eyes, you know, and it was spellbinding. And because he has this wonderful, he really tells a story. And I remember once watching him write a tune and I was mesmerized, and they said, all right, let's record one. And I wasn't paying attention the right way. I was really enthralled, but I didn't know how to play the song yet. And we recorded, and thankfully someone else goofed up before I did. But it was almost like one of those classic nightmares. If I had had no pants on, it would have been just as embarrassing, but somehow it worked out. But it was real cool. He ended up not using me on the record, and that was fine. But I went up there a few times, and it was neat. You know, it's cool to know. But I would, you know, I never heard from him again, and that's understandable.
That's, you know, what happens often. How you told me that you played like with some other jazz greats like Charlie Byrd and Doc. I never knew how to pronounce his last name. Cheatham.
We just say Cheatham.
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 Okay, Cheatham. All right. Mm-hmm. How was that experience? How did that happen?
Which one? Charlie Byrd?
Yeah, Charlie and Doc.
Well, Charlie, of course, being from DC, Charlie Byrd was a real big deal around here. Well, everywhere, but it was neat because he lived in Annapolis, but was in DC all the time. And when the Bossa Nova thing took off, I was like in second grade, 1962, and I heard Bossa Nova all the time, and my parents would go see him play in a place called Adams Morgan in DC. So my parents were big fans of him, and I had met Chuck Red, who was his drummer, great drummer and vibes player, like around 1981, something like that. Chuck called me one night, and he said, "Hey, Joe Byrd had thrown his back out. Can you play with us tonight?" I said, "Well, yeah, sure." And I hung up and I said, "Holy mackerel, he means Charlie Byrd." So I went to Charlie's in Georgetown. And we could talk about this for days. Charlie was a great musician and a great gentleman. And I knew probably one song that he did, which was Girl from Ipanema, and I probably played that wrong. And got on the gig. He had a few charts. He got me through that night, and I played with him the next night, all because of him taking me with him. You know what I mean? And it was really amazing. He was such a gentleman, and that was 80, 81. And then so about 5 years later, through Pete Kennedy, great guitar player, I think he lives in New York now, he got us some gigs together with Charlie. And that was really cool. And Charlie, on those things, wanted me to play fretless. So I played my electric fretless, and we did different stuff, you know, did a couple Motown tunes and standards. It was really great. And he was a big influence, and it was really great to get to know him a little bit and play some tunes with him. He's a wonderful person. Doc Cheatham, great trumpet player. I played a gig with him at Blues Alley, and gosh, he was only a few years younger than Louis Armstrong. So you know, he was a great musician, just a piece of history there. And that was through Brooks Tegler, a drummer I play with, had hooked up with him. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. After the gig, he was such a gentleman, told great stories. You know, he sang Have You Met Miss Jones and all these great tunes. He's so beautiful. And after the gig, he was thanking everybody, and he looked at me and he said, "What can I say?" And I said, "Wow, he's like speechless, you know." And then some years later, I probably shouldn't tell this on myself, but a few years later, I found out that a lot of the older guys would say that when they weren't that knocked out with your plan. They would just say, "Oh, what can I say?" So I don't know if it meant he didn't like it or maybe he was knocked out. But anyway, I always thought that was pretty funny. But I enjoyed it. I would have played anywhere with him. He was great. So, you know, these tunes that we learn them on the fly. You know, they just throw tunes at you, and you know, as a bass player, they don't tell you a lot. You know, if you're doing a jazz gig, they make sure the piano player knows it, and the singer or sax player, they never ask me. I know, you know. So, which is good. You know, I learn stuff. But,
well, it keeps us on our toes. I would love to hear you play a little bit, and I'm sure our audience as well. Can you play something for us?
No, I don't think so. I'm kidding. Of course I can. Well, let me see. One thing I have in common with Ray Brown, we're both people and we both play bass. That's about it. But Ray was once asked, "What's your favorite thing to do?" And he said, "You like playing on accompanied ballads." And that's actually something I like to do. So I'll see if I can get through I Can't Get Started, which is also Mingus feature. He liked to play this tune. So do you want me to just play the melody, or do you want me to take a solo, or do you care? What?
Whatever you feel like it. You know, this show is all about you, and I want to hear you playing as long as you want, and whatever you want.
Okay, I appreciate it. All right, I'll better back up. Okay. Just didn't get through that.
Awesome. We got like some really nice comments from Cloudberry. This is really smooth listening to. John stands out, right? Lyrical and beautiful, so vocal.
Oh,
Yeah, really wrote so smooth. So everybody love your playing.
well, what did Lester? Lester Young. A lot of the older cats that I played with, not just Danny, but some of these great tenor players that are no longer with us. Al Seibert and Ted Afanis, Joe Stanley. Joe Stanley was a big hero to Danny too. Great tenor player and singer. They thought of the lyrics while they were playing. And there's a story about Lester Young on a gig with somebody, and he flubbed up a little bit. And they said, "Hey, Prez, what happened to you?" He said, "Well, I forgot the lyrics." I love that.
That's a really cool story. Are you thinking about the lyrics when you play?
Yeah, that's a good tune. It's one of my favorites. I can't get started with you. It's about love. I didn't mean to bring that up, but it's about love.
It is a beautiful song, and it is beautiful the way you play it as well. When have you started performing solo? And I know that you have one solo album.
Yeah, I did an album. I don't really have a solo career per se. I did that album, 2002, dedicated to my daughter Rosetta, named after the Earl Father Hines tune. Wonderful piano player Tim Ford that I work with sings that. And when I heard the lyrics, we just decided to name her, my wife, her mom decided to name her Rosetta when she was born. And so anyway, it's called Swinging Lullabies for My Rosetta on the Maple Shade label. So yeah, it was great. Big Joe Mayer's on that, John Cacuzzi on piano and vibes. Rosetta's mom, Mariana, is on that. Rick Whitehead plays guitar. Anyway, it came out pretty nice. Pierre Spray, who owns Maple Shade, records kind of like they did in the 40s and 50s. It might be just a couple mics, no editing, or it's just straight playing, and it sounds great. Nice big room. That's a great way to play and record. So
that's probably the best way to record, as long as you play it good. These days, it's people can get by with not very good playing, and they end up with decent sounding records.
yeah.
But there's often something soulful missing, which we can get if we record on tape and with good musicians. If people some of our viewers, if they want to like get that record or hear it, is that record still available?
So far as I know, Maple Shade Records, it's still a thing. I guess look up Maple Shade. I don't have any CDs on me right now, but yeah, I guess Maple Shade Records.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And any of the streaming platforms like Spotify, YouTube, or something?
I think it is.
Okay.
It seems to me it is, but I can't remember right now.
Okay.
I don't get out much, obviously, but yeah.
And is that the only album that you recorded as a solo artist?
Yeah, that would be it. I do projects with people here and there, but yeah, I guess I should do another one. I always wished I could do what Dave Holland did, another great hero of mine. He did a couple albums just by himself, and I've always wanted to be able to pull that off. I thought that'd be cool.
It's really hard, like to play just the bass.
I know too.
and to make it interesting. Yeah. Dave Holland also did I think he had like a big band as well, like a Dave Holland big band.
Yeah. Great player.
Yes, great guy and amazing upright bass player. Not a slapper though. I don't think he slaps, right?
I don't think so. I'd like to ask him. I only met him one time. I was so nervous that I had to be dragged over to talk to him, but he was such a gentleman. In fact, I was with Jeff Charlie and another great player, Dominic Vigliotti. They're both gone. We went to some seminar in Richmond, Virginia, and he was going to be there the next day, and he was sitting behind us. And I said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't think I could be that nervous." And, they made me go talk to him, and of course, he was wonderful. He was a wonderful guy. But he's got a big, deep swing. He loved Mingus, Leroy Vinegar, people like that. I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if he could slap. He plays real well. He's a great musician.
Absolutely. His action, when I saw him last time, it was at Yoshi's in Oakland, and his action was very, very low. So I thought that he would be slapping that bass.
Yeah, maybe. So I never got maybe it's gotten lower over the years. Did he have that travel bass, that one that looks like it's got the bottom cut off?
This was a long time ago. I think it was a regular bass.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty sure it was a regular bass.
Yeah, might not have been his. There's some live Mingus things over in Europe, and you can tell. I don't think it's his bass. It looks brand new. It's all shiny, and they have him playing through a Bandmaster amp. This big old amp behind him, and he still sounds great. But you can tell it's not his rig. So. But you asked me in one of your questions about traveling, and every time I've used someone else's bass, it's been a mistake. So it's always worth it. Every time, it'll sound great. Oh, this sounds great, and then I get on stage and plug it in. It sounds like a shoebox with a Band-Aid on it. It's just all. I played in Belgium with Danny. We flew over just for that. It was so exciting, and there was a beautiful bass they had for me. And when I plugged it in, I kid you not, I couldn't get any pitches out of it. It was through the amp. I don't know why. And I didn't care. I had such a great time. I felt like Marcel Marceau. You couldn't hear what I was playing. I guess somebody could hear it, but it's always a mistake. We did the Montreux Jazz Festival and borrowed a bass, borrowed an amp. Everything stopped working. The bass, it just doesn't work, So whenever I can, I'll fly with this. I'll borrow a flight case and just take it with me. It's worth the expense. I go down and, got canceled because of the lockdown, but I was going to play down in for the New Orleans, the Jazz Festival down there. And I was just going to find my bass down or drive it. I don't care. I'd rather drive for 2 days if I can take my bass than use one that's there. It's never worked out.
I mean, yeah, if you want to play, since you're playing the show, you want to sound good. You don't want to sound bad, and that's often the case. Like with not so good basses, had some bad experience, especially in South America, because you always have to fly from between shows, and then they just provide you with the bass, and then it's like, all right.
Yeah, if you like your action high, nobody uses high action. It's always down on the neck. And I did something overseas. I was there for a week and had this bass. I couldn't adjust the action, and I played for a whole week, and I never got used to it. I did what I could, but I can't. I need to have something to pull against. I'd rather it was a little bit too hard to play than too easy.
I know. I feel you. I don't think that other musicians realize how big of a problem we have with that issue.
Piano players do, but yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk about like your songwriting process. Do you write music as well?
No, I really don't.
No, for that solo album.
For the one I did, no, those are all standards.
Okay.
I think I've helped people. Maybe I've contributed or something. I don't know. Might sound corny, but I guess when I'm soloing, I try to think like that. To go back to Mingus, he said improvisation should be spontaneous composition. That was his thing. So I try to think like that. I admit it's a knack I don't have, and I work with different singer-songwriters, and I just admire what they do. I'm not sure why I can't seem to get that going. I think about it now and then I stop. So I'm sorry, I don't have anything.
You improvise so beautifully, so I'm sure that if you decide to do a record with all original songs, it will still be amazing.
Well, I appreciate it.
And you had like such a long and successful career with different genres, and I wanted to ask you how things changed, like for you as a musician, since you started until now, like as far as music industry, audience, musicians that you play with, clubs.
Well, the obvious thing is, and not just because of this past year, but like I said, I was talking to a good buddy of mine, Richard Clifton, yesterday. Taught me my first bass line on bass, actually. How Many More Times by Led Zeppelin. Anyway, when we were coming up, we're both from Prince George's County, which is a little south of where I am. And this is talked about in the documentary. DC, Southeast DC, a lot of people from there would go to Prince George's County. That's how my family ended up there. And there's this, we're off of 301. 301 was the old way to get to Florida, north to south. And so there were clubs all over the place. It looked like Las Vegas, the neon lights and music in every club. And you'd go out to dinner with your family, there'd be a band or a piano player. And when I started with Danny, it was still like that. You could play every night during the day. There's just, I'm not just being nostalgic, it's the way it was. And it was just assumed that a place would have music, restaurants and what have you. And I guess that's the big difference. I mean, before the lockdown, I was still blessed to be able to play 3 or 4 nights a week. And, so, I mean, I was still keeping my hand in it, and I love all the music I'm doing. So I'm very blessed that way. So, but I guess that might be the big difference. It's harder to find a listening crowd, I think, because you'll play in a restaurant, nobody's there to hear the music, and it's real loud, or they're just not paying attention. But I don't really do that so much anymore. When I'm playing, thankfully, it's people come to hear the band. And of course, with Danny, it was people always wanted to hear him. But I guess that's the biggest difference. I know Baltimore, just a little bit north of us, they have a big Django Reinhardt scene up there, and I love Django's music and love playing it. And there's a lot going on up there. It's kind of like DC used to be. There's a place called Fells Point in Baltimore. There's almost every club you walk by has music in it. So that's cool. I mean, I look forward to that coming back. So, it's still there. A lot of us old guys say, it's not what it used to be, but I think there's still stuff to do. You just have to look for it in different places. A lot of the clubs I came up playing in are gone, or they've changed what they do. So I hardly, except for Blues Alley, I don't play anywhere I played 20 or 30 years ago. So I guess that's the big difference, but you have to go look for it. House concerts are big now, and I think that's a good idea. Just doing block parties and stuff, I think that's a good idea. Talking about Pops Foster, the great New Orleans bass player, who apparently he says he's the guy that started slap and playing pizzicato because his bow broke, which could be. But when I read his autobiography years ago, I remember noting that he didn't talk about clubs at all. He always talked about parades, parties, rent parties, weddings, never talked about playing bars and clubs. And that's kind of okay too. I think we would do better, musicians would do better if we took a little more, a little more initiative and plan stuff on our own. Like I said, house concerts are really popular around here, and it's great. Everyone there wants to be there. You have a little block party or a yard party, invite people. That's a great way to play. If you're not Bruce Springsteen, there's a whole bunch of people that aren't famous that are still playing and play all kinds of great music. So that's a long-winded answer. I think it has changed. But yeah.
Do you still tour occasionally? I mean, before the pandemic.
Yeah, somewhat. Of course, with Danny, we did when we got with Electro. We had a bus and all that stuff, and got to travel a lot. And then, and since then, I still, I've gone overseas several times, like with Big Joe Mayer or Brooks Tegler, drummer. We've gone different places. So it's been great. As far as in America, I tend to go down to Louisiana once in a while. I have a trio with Tom Mitchell and Ben Redwine. Ben's a great clarinet player, Tom's a great guitar player and singer. We have a trio that we used to have up here, and since Ben's been down in Louisiana, we go down there occasionally. And yeah, I mean, I'll go wherever the gig is, but I travel all around. It's not unusual for me to go up to New York or down to as far as New Orleans or something like that. But it just depends what year it is, But I don't live on.
Have you mentioned that you occasionally play New Orleans?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's neat.
There are some great great slap bass players down there. Have you have you ever encountered anyone?
No, they don't talk to me down there, and I'm kind of ostracized. I'm kidding. No, I haven't really gotten to meet. I haven't met any slap players that I can think of for some time now. I mean, there are some great players in town in DC, younger guys, and not so young. There's a really cool rockabilly band in town called Jumpin' Jupiter. And in fact, their guitar player does my bass work, Pat Cavanaugh. The Chuck Levins Music, if you ever need work done, he works there. And great guitar player. And their bass player, Louis Newmeyer, he's a really fine slap player, very swinging. And they're kind of edgy. They're not just they can do the traditional thing, but they tend to be a little more edgy, and they're really good. And there's some neat younger guys whose names are escaping me right now that are really fine. And they have a lot more, like you interviewed Missy Raines, right?
Yes.
I met her in the mid 80s. She was scary then. She was so good. She's terrific. But I don't know where she lives. I think down south. She doesn't live around here, but she was always a great player. So yeah, there are guys
she
around.
Lives in Nashville.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, she's top of the line. She's great. She's a great musician.
She is.
Yeah. But I have another amusing story, but I'm not going to tell it. That's okay. They all make me look bad, which is amusing.
Yeah. When you mentioned New Orleans, I thought maybe you met an older gentleman by the name Richard Moten, who's an excellent jazz player, and he's a slapper as well. And then he almost never play slap, but he's a jazz guy. And then I went to his house once, and then we talked about Milt Hinton and all those amazing bass players. It was really cool, So
his name's familiar, but I never got to meet him.
Yeah. In New Orleans, there's a fair amount of great players. When things like go back to normal, are you going to tour again, or are you going to stay and play mostly locally?
Well, I hope to get back down to New Orleans because we still have to do that Jazz Fest gig. So we had other gigs around it, and in fact, I was going to go down twice in May, and both weeks got canceled, obviously. So yeah, I'm not on the road a lot, but I'm willing to do it, But I mostly play around town or the Eastern Seaboard someplace.
I read that you were featured on the soundtrack of that PBS documentary Barnstorming.
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen? And how were you involved with the whole project?
Well, Brian Reichardt and his wife, they're married now, Suzanne Brindamore, another great singer-songwriter. Brian was producing this. He does a lot of documentaries. And I think Suzanne was writing the music, and she just called me one day at Brian's behest. And I had met Brian right after Danny died, 1995, because he was starting the documentary then, although he had started many years before that, but that was the year I met him. And so he remembered me and suggested that she call me. And that's how that came about. And she did a lot of great tunes, a lot of nice ukulele playing, really lyrical stuff. And then about 10 years ago, my wife and I moved to this neighborhood, and Brian and Suzanne lived here already, and another gentleman, Paul Glenshaw, another documentarian. And one day we were sitting in Paul's backyard, it was coming up on the 20th anniversary of Danny's passing. So it was 2014. And we just looked at each other and said, we ought to do something about that. So that's where that documentary started, the Anacostia Delta. So, yeah, so one thing led to another. And Danny was kind of the center of that. That's how I met Brian, and that's how I got on the barnstorming thing. So it was really cool. Have you watched that?
I haven't, but I plan to.
Yeah.
Are you also involved with that documentary called Humbler?
A little bit. Virginia Casada's doing that, and she interviewed me back when my beard was brown. So that's a long time ago, 1995. So she interviewed me a little bit, but I'm not involved with the production. I'm just, I'm a guest. She interviewed me a little bit.
Yes. Do you know when that movie documentary going to be out?
That one, I'm not sure. Apparently, she has some real nice stuff. Hers is a more straight up biography of Danny, which is wonderful. Ours started out that way, and then, like I might have mentioned, we were talking about Danny, and then talking about the people that influenced Danny. And I was mightily blessed to be able to play with a gentleman named Frankie Shago, whom we just lost a couple of years ago. Frankie was the guy that Danny admired so much. They met Frankie, he was about 83 when he passed. When they met, Danny was about between 9 and 11 years old. Frankie just gotten out of the Navy around 1954 or something like that, the year I was born. And so Danny was about 9, I guess. And they stayed friends, Danny, they were in a guitar shop, and Frankie was trying out a guitar, and this little young fellow comes up and watches them and was very courteous, says, "Oh, you sound very good, sir." And it turned out it was Danny, and they stayed friends. And Danny, I won't cuss again, but he just thought the world of Frankie. And Frankie was such a great player, really had his own sound. We got to play together a lot. So getting to know him a couple of years, I got to know him just before we started doing the documentary, and I realized, well, we had to have Frankie in there. And that led us talking about Joe Stanley, the great tenor player, who also played with Frankie in a band called the Saxtons, which was Joe Stanley's band. Well, the Saxtons, after Frankie left, they had Roy Buchanan in the band because Roy was in the area. But this is we're talking about the 50s and 60s. So, one thing leads to another, and we couldn't just leave it about Danny. It had to be about these other people that influenced him. And then there's a whole bunch of us that are still assessing Danny's influence on us. We learned songs from him. We learned techniques. Like the way Danny plays Harlem Nocturne, we try to do that with other tunes too. That kind of feel. So that's a big deal. Danny is he's a big deal. He's a great player, but he was a huge mentor to so many of us, and taught us so much about music without necessarily talking about it. He just demonstrated. He could play bass lines while we were playing. Like I said, I never looked at the audience. I always kept my eye on him. And there's something that he did I thought you might be interested in. We'd be playing a tune, and he'd start playing a line while he was improvising and playing a melody or whatever. So we talk about the organ trios that Danny liked. He did this thing. It's very simple, but I don't hear it a whole lot unless it's a B3 player. He would just say we're in the key of C. He would do something like, very simple, but it's a little bit different because normally you go, which is also great. But the organ guys, they do this kind of thing, and you play it real straight, and then you get the organ shuffle on top of it, right? So you get this. So that's a little thing, but getting that offbeat, that's what the organist would do. They'd be kicking the pedal, they'd have the left hand, and then they'd begin chatting, batting, and Dave Elliott, great drummer, he had this great hi-hat where you do these organ shuffles. So that offbeat's playing on 2 and 4. I wouldn't play that all the way through the song necessarily, but it's neat to have that because, you know, it moves it along, and to be other simple things like Danny might just start going, which is another thing an organist might do. I'm actually getting my right-handed there. Sorry. And you can do that with slapping too if you want. You can get just simple, but it's swing. Jumping around a little bit, but that's how I learned to play a lot of stuff. I just learned that Danny would just show it to me, and then I'd grab hold of it, and then he'd go do something else, and we'd play it for a while. Maybe, and he might just do it a couple times a night, you know. I mean, all those things I'm doing, you wouldn't necessarily play it all the way through the song, but it's a nice way to propel. You can do the offbeat, or you can do it the jazz way, the way the guys. So it gives that, you're getting that offbeat. It's a nice swinging thing to do, man. If they let you.
Of course. It is really cool. You mentioned slap now and like a certain patterns that you can play with slap. I always like to ask my guests about terminology, since slap bass it's not something that exists in the school, or there's no really an instructional method that has been strict about names, and everybody's doing calls like different patterns, their own thing. So I wondered what kind of slap patterns do you use, and how do you usually name them?
Name them? I don't think I named them. You know,
like a single slap, double slap, triple slap.
Oh,
like what terminology did you use?
Like if I'm trying to show somebody, like, yeah, I guess I do that. I mean, I find, I might have mentioned this already, that a lot of the slapping I do, I'm thinking in terms of, you know, Willie Dixon and some of the older guys that were doing it to be heard to start off. I mean, I know Milt Hinton talked about this. Someone asked him about it, I said, well, that's how we could be heard. You know, it's probably Pops Foster said the same thing. There's no amplifiers and probably no microphone. And so I think in those terms a lot. I just, I just like the way it swings. Like that, you're not even slapping, you're just snapping the string. Like that. And then you have to slap. So it's a single slap. You know. And I remember Danny showing me the rumba, and I remember you talking to Jimmy Sutton about this, which is, you can break this up and put it anywhere, you know. So, yeah, I guess single, double. I mean, some guys get the 3 and 4 slaps in there, and I tell you what I like doing. There's sometimes you'll be doing an acoustic thing, and it gets real funky. You can do this thing where there's a tune we do by Mississippi John Hurt called Denomination Blues, and somehow it just turned into this like it's a kind of a John Hurt thing, which is what it is, and then you play real straight over top of the beat. It's almost like an old washing machine or something, but I don't know what to call that. It's kind of a rumba beat, but more straight up and down, I guess. But, you know, I'm not, you know, I like soloing, doing it. I'm not a real fancy, I'm kind of like an old pickup truck, the way I play. You know, I can still carry stuff, but a lot of guys really, like I said, Missy, she's got all that. She's really, you know, but you know, you don't know. In the heat of battle, different things come out, you know. But I admit, I do like showing my younger students that, and as soon as I do it, they go, "What is that?" Every one of them, you show them that, and they can't believe it, you know. And so I said, "Yeah, I'll show you that if you learn how to play Mary Had a Little Lamb first. You know, you got to hold that in front of them." But they love it. They love it. And I've got a couple that I know they'll keep doing it. If they keep playing. Right. I started in 3rd grade and up, so you know, whatever.
So basically, as far as nomenclature goes, like you use you call if you just pull the string, you talk about it. You call it a snap. That's
snapping the string.
You don't call it a slap, right?
No, I guess I'm not slapping until I come back. So.
Yeah, there's like a different ways, like and approaches. I usually like to call, you know, this a single slap. You know, since the string is slapping the fingerboard, and you know, with all the rockabilly bass players that, you know, or blues, you know, like when they play like without that back slap, it's still slap bass, and then I would usually call a double slap this, and then so on and so on.
Yeah, I think maybe I don't call it. I mean, of course, it's the same technique. You know, it is slap, but like I said, I'm kind of thinking about those old cats that had to play with no amp. They're pulling the string just to make it project. You know, you get like if I'm doing that, I just feel like I'm. But yeah, it's slap bass, sure. But I don't. Okay. It's not always appropriate. It depends what song I'm doing. It's not always appropriate to come back and slap it. You know, come back and slap it. But yeah.
Yes. It's interesting because I noticed also that the different styles, different music genres, like different bass players use a certain terminology. So for bluegrass, they often use that rumba pattern that we were talking about. They call that a triple slap often, and then I encountered a couple of people that call this like, they call that a triple slap because you kind of snap and then three times, so
it's almost like imitating the echo. Yeah, that's good shit. Of course, Milt could get 4 slaps in there, and
he was talking about like 4, but the main thing that I heard Milt playing, it was that slap, and then, for example, if it was a rhythm change, it would be like something like something like that, but it would never be like more than.
Yeah, sure.
I would say so. They're like different, more complex patterns, but I don't think that Milt was using anything more complex than that. But it's a kind of like a conversation that I like, like asking everyone, because there's no, for me always there's no like right or wrong way. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to make sense of all of these, like just like to present and help people learn it. But whoever plays it right, that's the only judge. If it sounds good, it sounds good. If it doesn't sound good, it doesn't sound good.
My problem is I have trouble labeling things anyway, like even patterns I play. I kind of think major, minor, and dominant. I don't really. I have friends that are very versed in that, and I like to ask them what you call something. And it can be helpful, but you end up playing a lot of stuff in the heat of the moment that you can't really. It's hard to name. It's hard to put a label on it. And that's just the way it is.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I use it just like to show it like to students or people that are interested, to.
Oh, yeah. I think you're right. I like the idea that you coming up with the terminology. It's a cool idea. I guess it's funny. We're just we just have a different idea of what a single slap is. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is that if you like Willie Dixon, I love watching him. Besides the fact he's huge, just watching him play with those big mitts, and it's so smooth the way he's swinging with, I guess it's Panama Red or Roosevelt Sykes. It's just so killer, And then when he does put a slap in there, it's a big deal. You know what I'm saying? It's cool.
You talk about Willie Dixon?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, it is like he was playing some amazing stuff, and there's like one pattern that he was really doing. I don't think that anybody else was doing back in those days, like comparable to the other blues guys like Ransom Knowling or John Lindsay. There's a cool pattern that it's we a few of us like to call it Willie Dixon quadruple, because he was playing kind of like a 2 double slaps, but like with a muted note in between. So he often played it in his solos, like a hard notch boogie beat that he did. He played that type of thing, and it sounded. I love that solo, and it's great.
That's cool, man. Yeah. Are you I'm sorry, use all steel string?
I usually use all steel strings. This bass is not mine since I'm in Europe right
Oh,
now.
good for you.
And so I just borrowed my friend's bass, and it just has two guts, two steels, and now it sounds good for for Willie Dixon stuff.
Mhm.
But my bass is much different. But it's we talked about this. We have to learn how to play other people's basses,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's you know it's part of the gig. And then I borrowed it. I don't have any gigs here. I just borrowed it for this show, so I can talk to people, and then when there's something like this come up, so that I can demonstrate or show something. um, I also wanted to ask you about that award that you received. How did that feel? You were awarded like a best musician in the Washington metro area or something, like in
Yeah.
2002.
We had an organization called WAMA, Washington Area Musicians Association. Is that what it was? Yeah. And yeah, I won that one year. It was kind of fun. It's nice to be appreciated by your peers. So yeah, it was kind of neat. It's not around anymore. I guess it stopped a couple years ago. And I think my album won something too. Yeah. I gave that award to my daughter, so she's got that at her house. And so yeah, it's nice. It's a lot of fun.
Yes. Especially for bass players, we as bass players like don't get like much recognition.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the reasons why we chose this bass is because we'd like to be team players, so we'd like to support
Mhm.
more than be under the
Spot.
light and be the rock stars. But it's yeah, it's fun.
Well,
It's good to be
I was,
part of the groove.
yeah. Well, I was always drawn to bass too because for that reason, it was always like James Jamerson, people like that, or we grew up. We always had jazz on the radio. Um, Coming home from my grandmother's house, it would be Felix Grant with the album sound. That was in D.C. He also helped get bossa nova going in the '60s with Charlie Byrd. But you'd hear Ray Brown or whomever it was, or James Jamerson. It was the bass is always moving, kind of melodic in its own way, but supportive and moving things along. It's fascinating. Yeah, it, we do think about music differently, and I love getting with the drummer, whoever it is. I had a great drummer with Danny, like in the mid '80s. We had this a wonderful period of time with Danny when we played a lot of jazz. We had a house gig at a place called Gallagher's, and it was kind of like a workshop. We had three horn players and Danny and me. Great drummer Barry Hart, great drummer. He could do anything. I learned a lot from Barry too, and we do tempos. It sounds funny, but we just see how fast we could play sometimes, and it was really astonishing. And Danny, I was thinking about this morning. I remember doing one of those gigs, and he took the whole first set and he played with only his thumb the whole set for like an hour and a half, playing chord melodies and playing Wes Montgomery stuff. It was, I saw facets in his playing. I knew he could do everything, but it was really amazing what he would come up with. And he was so deep. He had so much there. And then we do these tempos, and Barry and Danny would just, and three horns. It was really amazing. You did more than you thought you could do. I mean, Danny was like that. He brought that out of you. You always, there's always, you always ended up doing more than you thought you were capable of. Stuff you can't practice.
Those gigs are the best. Yeah, those gigs are the best. I can't imagine how it was playing with Danny. I remember hearing, was it Olio that you recorded, that you played live? Had like a super fast tempo, Sonny Rollins.
With Danny? Oh, I think we did. I think we did "Sunny Moon for Two" real fast, which sounded different. It
Okay.
didn't sound like the way I'm using. It was, yeah. That's Olio. So yeah, I think it was "Sunny Moon for Two," which is blues. Yeah, we did a lot.
Yeah, it's so cool that he was able to incorporate like rockabilly gigs, licks in jazz tunes and jazz licks in country tunes and all of that. I really like that. When you were doing those tunes, did you have like a similar approach? Would you slap a jazz tune, or would you play like a jazz licks in a rockabilly tune? Did you have you tried like to have that kind of approach? Was that what was going in your mind as well?
Oh, certainly. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we did versions of, Honeysuckle Rose really fast, and sometimes it's kind of neat. Sometimes you don't feel like breaking up the rhythm to do a horn-like solo on the bass. It's kind of neat to slap it. It keeps it moving. It's a neat thing. You're keeping the rhythm and the swing happening. So yeah, we would do something like Cherokee or what have you. It'd be great to slap that Honeysuckle Rose or Avalon, what have you. And when I'm playing, like doing Latin tunes with a jazz trio or something to slap the rhythms, if it's not too overbearing, it can get kind of loud if there's no drums or if it's a quiet gig. But well, that's a challenge too. Just something simple like that. It's I've done gigs with people where they weren't expecting that and they got a big kick out of it, because it was very propulsive. And we're doing our you're doing your bossa nova medley and for the 800th time, and it's nice to bring something to it that's a little different. And that's why it's jazz. We're improvising, and jazz isn't just one thing. Well, music isn't just one thing. Like I said, Hank Williams knocks me out just as much as Duke Ellington. They're both just great. And yeah, and with Danny, it didn't matter what song you started with, you didn't know where you might end up. And so I always carried that with me. And that's just what I think it ought to be like. It just makes sense to me. So, it was good fit.
That's great, but that's very, very unique. People, I mean, especially in US, like people try to fit you in a certain category, and then it's try to get out of it, and then just tell people, hey, it's just music. Just listen. With your heart and with your ears, and then just enjoy.
And a lot of the older cats I came up with, like Danny, of course, and Joe Stanley, they would do Hank Williams tunes, for instance, but then they do them funky, or they do them like a shuffle, or stuff that we're used to now, but it was a big deal then. Like your Cheating Heart, do it like an organ shuffle, or do it funky, or what have you, like an R&B tune. And because these guys, they were great players, but they're also very professional, and they knew if they were hired to do something, they were counted on to do it. And it was very important for them to be able to do that stuff. You do a wedding with some guys, they're real jazzers, and you do a wedding with them, it's a drag because they think it's beneath them, and I just don't look at it that way. I mean, weddings can be a pain in the neck, but basically being able to do a request, that's a challenge to me. I think that's cool. One time I was doing a trio with Big Joe Mayer on drums and John Kikuzi on piano. And we were doing a wedding, and some wise guy kept saying, "Hey, play In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida." And we ignored him. After 6 or 7 times, Joe said, "All right, we'll show you." And we played In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, piano, bass, and drums. And he sang it, and it was a stitch, I haven't played it since, but just a silly thing like that, that's important. To me, it's just always been important. I think being able to improvise and play by the seat of your pants is a really big deal. And all my favorite players, they knew what they were doing theoretically, but they just played in the moment. And that's what it means to be responsive. To be responsive and responsible. You got each other's back, you're supporting one another. Whatever the leader goes into, you're right with them. You don't complain about it. And, well, I learned that, like I said, I was just a kid when I started with Danny, and once or twice he had to sit me down and talk to me. I'm glad he did, when I thought I knew more than he did. But that's an important thing. They had a lot of honor. They had a lot of honor in what they were doing. Not arrogance, but they were very honorable in their profession. And a lot of cats that I played with, the older guys, they were in show bands, and it was a very serious thing, to be able to play everything, no matter what people asked for. It was a big deal. So I always appreciate that.
I bet. Who would you say was your biggest influence on your bass playing?
On upright would be Charles Mingus. Electric would be Jack Bruce. And Jack Bruce was a great upright player too. Cello, he played cello, was a great singer, keyboard, organ, piano. But I think he was the first person, besides someone like James Jamerson, huge influence. I don't think anyone's yet equaled what James Jamerson does. The way he could play a tune for 5 minutes and it would change the whole time, and yet it always was perfect, didn't just play the same part over and over. But yeah,
Absolutely.
I think the more I dig into Mingus and Jack Bruce, the more I find there's just something about those guys. It's pretty deep, But a lot of guys, George DeVivier, Sam Jones, Milt Hinton, of course, Ray Brown. I met Ray Brown one time. I watched his trio. He came to 20 years ago, not long before he passed away, 2000. And I had a CD. He was selling CDs. So I took it up to him to sign it. And he was real quiet that night. I think Milt Jackson was very sick and he was kind of distracted. And he's signing the CD. And I'm looking at him. I started to tear up. I didn't cry. But if he had talked to me, I probably would have. But it was that big a deal, just to even, we didn't talk or anything. He signed my CDs, very nice. And I realized how important someone like that is to you. Him specifically, it's a big deal. I get a kick out of it. But yeah, I started to tear up a little bit. So I'm glad he didn't talk to me. I would have embarrassed myself probably.
Whoever I know that Ray Brown said he was a wonderful person, and we all know how wonderful bass player he was.
Oh yeah.
What would you say? How did you develop your own style of playing upright?
Well, style. I think trying to keep in mind the two qualities, well, including Danny too, is that the qualities that great players have isn't just their facility. You look at someone like Danny, it was the strength with which he played. And Jack Bruce and Mingus both had that. And so without, I went through a period of trying to imitate guys, but it's hard to explain. You know, I'm always trying to think of the tune. I try to learn the melodies of tunes that I play as much as possible. And just trying to make sure I'm moving a lot of air as much as possible, you know, with control. Like if you play down here, it sounds different than up here. Trying to get as big a sound as I can. And I don't know, I guess it's hard for me to formulate just what I've done, but, and try to just play off of the people around me, but be supportive without getting in their way, you know. It's always been important to me to have the best technique I can, just so that I can, if I need it, you know. I've tried to, the challenge for me has always been playing across the bass and fourths, you know. So if you're playing, you can do that, or find different places where the scales and arpeggios sit. So you're not always playing in the same part of the note, not always going up the string, but going across. So I've tried to let other kinds of musicians influence what I do, guitar players, of course, and horn players. I love guitar. I don't really play it, but I've always been in, what I like about guitar players, how they can play out of chord forms. And that's a really cool thing. And it's easy on bass to kind of start here and go across and then go up the string. And that's fine. And you need to know how to do that too. But I always like being able to. So you can start on the E string on B flat instead of always going across and up the G string. So I guess that's kind of a stylistic thing. Like you're doing something like Honeysuckle Rose. So try to keep my hand kind of big so I can hit the intervals and play chords across the bass without having to shift all over the place, you know. And I don't really have very big hands, so it's always important to get that together. So that's something I try to work on, being able to play across the neck. And, you know, guitar players can play in shapes and move those shapes around. And you look at some method books, they'll have one fingering for C, then they go to D flat, and it's a whole other fingering. Well, they're only a half step apart. You know, it's a fundamental thing, but I try to keep that stuff in mind when I'm playing. And I forgot what else I was going to say. Something like that.
Yeah. What would you say that were, by your opinion, what are the most essential slap bass recordings on the upright, of course?
Well, I guess I've kind of mentioned them, like the Milt Hinton thing you were talking about.
Blocking the bass?
Yeah, you know. I'm blanking out here. Of course, Willie Dixon. If you can get good recordings of the Chuck Berry stuff, sometimes he's not that prominent, but he's doing a lot of cool stuff in those.
He did.
Yeah. I love, once again, thing about Charles Mingus, that My Jelly Roll Soul is a really neat, is so musical. He had so much fun. Another thing about Mingus is he's surrounded by all these serious jazz guys, and he's, yelling and playing, he's slapping and yelling, and that's so great, and any of that stuff. There's, going back to that thing we're talking about, there's this live thing with Slam Stewart and Don Bias, and I'm sure you've heard it. I think there was a snowstorm, and they were the only two guys to show up for the gig, and I think they're doing I Got Rhythm. I think that's what they're playing. Well, of course, Slam Stewart's a great arco player, but when he's playing time, you can hear him pulling that string. He's doing that single slap, I guess you'd call it. And I think that's a really important recording. I think it's on some Smithsonian collection. But it's Don Bias and Slam Stewart live. And the rest of the band didn't show up. So it's just the two of them. I'm forgetting.
Do you remember the name of that?
The name of the tune, I think, is I Got Rhythm. I think they're doing I Got Rhythm.
Okay.
And then he plays a killer arco solo, singing, I'm blanking out on some other stuff. I can't remember the names of a couple of things, but the early Elvis stuff had some neat stuff on it.
Absolutely, with Bill Black. I wanted to ask you about the rockabilly thing. Like, so besides Danny, were you playing rockabilly with anyone else?
Well, in the late 80s, 89 and 90, I played with Bill Kirchen for a couple of years. And he would do stuff like that too. So I mean, and Bill was very versatile also. So yeah, we did stuff where I would slap the solos, rockabilly type stuff, old rock and roll. Yeah. A lot of, but not all my slap playing is in rockabilly. Like I said, I don't know if you call it old timey, but 30s, 20s and 30s stuff. And I slap a lot in that kind of music too. And I'm still that's the most current slapping I'm doing is that, and it's more or less acoustic. And I like that anyway, because it just sounds better, feels better. When I've always used an amp, so I'm not against them, but the amplifier has a way of, the note doesn't come out as immediately, so it just sounds different to me. But Bill Kirchen, and nowadays with the people I would have played with down in New Orleans, Tom Mitchell. You look up Tom Mitchell, great guitar player and singer. We've recorded a few albums together, and Ben Redwine on clarinet. Yeah, we do a lot of. Apparently, gypsy's a bad word now, but we do a lot of gypsy stuff, Django Reinhardt, and older stuff. Tom studied with some of the Django people following his footsteps over there in, I think it was Holland. Some of those guys. So he kind of has a strong Django Reinhardt thing, but he still has his own sound, And so with him, I do a lot of slapping, that kind of thing.
Slap works great for gypsy jazz. It's really amazing. I mean, for any kind of Romani music, it's really, really, really cool. I love using slap with odd time signatures in the Balkan music and Romani music from the Balkans.
Oh, that's great! You do that. That's cool.
It is really cool. Yeah, right. I love it. Yeah. In Romania, they Romani people in Romania, they use, that's kind of their traditional way of playing bass is slap.
Oh, that's killer.
So it is really cool. Like, one of my favorite bands is from that particular style is Star of the Haiduks. Mm-hmm. With excellent bass player Vlad Viorel. Really fun. As far as you mentioned a few names, but you never played with Robert Gordon, right? And Danny.
No, I never got to.
Okay. That's what I was wondering. Like, have you played with Danny during that period? And then, if you played, because Robert Gordon, I guess I'm sure that he would have been happy, like, to have you, considering that he always wanted a slap bass player. And then, I mean, that slap works great in that style, and then he often had electric bass players or uprights that didn't slap really.
I'd love to play with Robert Gordon. I met him. I know I met him once, but I think it was after Danny passed. It might have been at a benefit or tribute or something, but we didn't get to play together. Yeah, he's
okay.
I knew Danny when he was with Robert Gordon, but it was that period where I was out of town and he was traveling, and so yeah, that's great.
Something that I always like asking my guests, and especially jazz guys, is like, how did the band leaders that you played with, how did they react to slap? Like, was there anyone like saying like, "Hey, can you just don't play slap thing now?" Or if they were telling you like, "Hey, can you play slap all the time? Don't play pizzicato," or like, band leaders could be like that. So
Yeah, they can be. They can be a lot of things. I've never had anyone tell me not to. In fact, quite the opposite. Usually, they really enjoy it. And I mean, like, an unexpected type gigs. Like, I do gigs, might be in a hotel lobby or at a University of Maryland where nobody's listening. There'll be no drums, just keyboards, sax, and myself, and I'll just slap the Latin tunes or maybe some of the swing stuff, and they really enjoy it. They get a big kick out of it. I think I've run into a couple people who think it's real hokey or corny or whatever, but that's no big deal. But I've never run into a band leader who didn't like it, as long as it fit and was didn't get in the way. I mean, it can, even acoustically, it can really project, which is why those older cats used it. Projects like mad, so it could be a little overbearing, but I haven't really had any trouble with it. No, I'm glad to say. Real nice. Dadgum, I'm blanking out on her name. I can't believe this. I'm so embarrassed. Gina, please forgive me. I'm blanking out. I have a terrible memory. Anyway, she's when I play with her, she insists that I slap constantly, and I'm gonna. Please don't be mad at me. I can't believe I'm forgetting her name. One time, my first wife, I forgot her name, introducing her to somebody. That was real special. Gina DeLuca, please forgive me. Of course, that's her name. She's really a great singer, songwriter, cool guitar player. And she told me I want you to beat it like it owes you money. If I can slap every song all night, she likes that. And she's really cool. And we did a nice album together called Better Than Chocolate. It's a good album. She's really cool. You'd like her. Gina DeLuca, DeLuca.
I'll definitely check her out. And what would you say? What are the best examples of slap playing on the records that you did?
There aren't a whole lot. If you go to 88 Elmira Street, the first album we do with Elektra, it has the first song on it that I slapped all the way through, at least on record. I think it's called 88. It's called Elmira Street Boogie. It's an instrumental rockabilly tune. And I was still using steel strings when we did this, and it about killed me. And I was slapping on gigs and stuff, but it was the first time I slapped all the way through. And we did a couple takes, and it came out all right. So that's probably the biggest example I can think of. It seems to me with Tom Mitchell and Jimmy Stephenson, we did something where I slapped. We do something called the Blue Rhythm Boys. There are a couple albums. I think I'm slapping on some of that. As you can see, I've got a terrible memory, not just because I'm an old fart, but I'm just like that. But yeah, I think the 88 Elmira Street Boogie is certainly with Danny. That's the most prominent thing I've done up there in Bearsville.
And with Gina, are there any good examples of your slapping on her record?
Yeah, but I can't think of the tunes.
Okay, but it's on that record, Better Than Chocolate.
Yeah, pretty sure I'm slapping on there.
I'll have to check it out.
I'm blanking out, but it's a good album. Dave Chappell on guitar, Wes Crawford on drums.
I'll check it out, Gina. Better Than Chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a fairly new album, like a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think it came out about a year ago. It even has a video. We even did a video for this title tune. Yeah, it's very exciting.
All right.
I didn't even need a song. I did it all myself.
Oh, cool. It's really hard, like I noticed for the students of music and younger people to find the gig and get the gig. What would be your advice? What is the best approach to get involved with, other musicians and get the gig and get on the road, have like steady?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. One of the things I did, talking about Danny, I'd met Danny before I started playing with him, and I just started going to his gigs. And, when I first met him, the night I met him, I was teaching guitar at a friend's guitar shop, Bobby Hancock. He's no longer with us. And I met him through an old high school friend, and he introduced me to Danny. He said, "Oh yeah, John's a good player." I'm 21 years old, he said, he's a hot player. Danny says, "Oh yeah." So we all plugged into one amp, and I'm playing some cheap electric bass, and he made me play a G blues as fast as I could. And he thought I could play, although I don't know what he saw, but I appreciate it. And anyway, I'd go see him play. I think the thing to do is to go see other people play and introduce yourself and be respectful and get to know them, and then ask if you can sit in. There are jam sessions still, when people are playing. But in the meantime, listen to everything you can and learn as many styles, at least get them in your ear and under your hands. Of course, you practice your scales and everything, but you have to learn stuff by ear. Like you can't do it like we used to. I remember Mingus saying the best thing for a bass player is to just play along with the radio. And what he meant was just develop your ear, listen to all kinds of music, learn how the bass lines go. But it's easy for me because I like almost everything. So that helps a lot. But for instance, going up to Baltimore, there's a real thriving scene up there. A lot of great Romani players like you're talking about, but doing the odd time signatures, the music that you're talking about too, it's a lot of cool stuff. So there are opportunities, just meet these people and say hi. And they're so, most players, they're so enthusiastic about what they're doing. If you're really interested, they'll help you out. All the really good players, they want to help you out. That's what I found. So, get to know them, say hi. A good friend of mine, great drummer, Bernard Sweetney, he's from around here, played with Roberta Flack and Joe Zawinul and Jimmy Smith. He said, if you want to go to New York, which I never did, but if you did, you go up there, you pick one night of the week to go up there every night. every Tuesday, for instance. Then you go to the jam session or someone's gig and they get to recognize you after a while. Then you say hi to them, you get to know them, and then that's how you get to break in. But I don't know. I think those are the best ways, you know.
That's interesting. I always like asking that because I think that different generations have like different advices. You know, I heard also like, hey, you know, put an ad in a music store, and then like a, you know, somebody that it's younger would say like, be really present on internet or like post regularly, stuff like that. And so it's, I'm always interested to hear different approach, you
Sure.
know, to the same, basically same issue, because we all want to be as busy as possible and have like as much good quality work as possible. So it's
And if you can,
good.
if you show someone you can play and you are earnest about it, I guess it still happens, but it seems to me when I was coming up, you do a wedding gig and everybody on the gig would be older than you. And I can remember doing gigs where these older cats, they talked to me one time, they'd say B flat, and then they'd play a medley that went on for an hour and a half. And I didn't know any of the songs, but you just keep your head above water, and that's how you learn. And there you go, you know, and you got that gig by word of mouth. A buddy recommended him, you know, a bass player you knew couldn't make it, so he recommended you. You can't beat that, you know, playing with older guys that have
Yes,
going on, you know. So
it's so cool. If you could give like an advice like to younger John Previti, like, and maybe point out a certain mistake that you did, like what as far as your music career and path, and
mistake,
what would
wow,
you
there's so many. Something to avoid. Well, you know, when I was younger, like I said, I thought I knew. You know, I'll admit that when I first played with Danny, I liked Chuck Berry, I liked Fats Domino, but I can remember not understanding rockabilly, and I think I didn't know what to make of it, and maybe I didn't take it as seriously. I mean, I didn't have a bad attitude or anything, but I don't know. It's just, I think just acting like you know everything and not taking instruction. Um, he, Danny wasn't the first person I played with, but he taught me so much about the music business. Here's an example. I love this story because it showed how tough Danny was and how compassionate he was. I was, like I said, about 22, had stayed up all night the night before, hadn't slept, and we're playing a gig, and I'm playing bass guitar, and I'm leaning against my amp with my legs crossed because I was tired. And he looked at me and said, "Hey, John, stand up." And I said, "No." I thought I was being funny. I said, "No." And he looked at me and he made a fist that looked as big as my head. He said, "We're going to talk during the break." I said, "Oh, gosh, he's going to kill me." And so we still weren't finished with the set. And instead of beating me up, which I think he should have, he sat me down and talked to me for about a half hour. He said, "If you don't stop with the attitude, you won't just not be able to play with me, you won't be able to play with anybody." And he said, "I notice, you know, people are getting drunk and I know it's a drag and you get an attitude, you got to knock it off." And he was really kind to me, and he could have fired me on the spot, and he didn't. And God bless him for it. And I mean that. That was a big deal. So I learned that lesson in a hurry. You know, so it was a big deal. He took care of me. So that's a good example.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Uh, is there anything that you, since you teach, is there anything that you would recommend for bass players to practice on everyday bass? What would be the perfect practice routine?
Well, we all talk about scale, but I think more than just scales, your arpeggios, and learn. Here you go. So when you're starting out, you get your technique, your scales and arpeggios. And then you learn, like I like to take the real book or something. And it's not, the real book's not always right, but I get in the bass clef. And I might just, like here's an example right now. Like we got a tune like Mood Indigo, like by Duke Ellington. You look at the melody, learn how to read at least enough to get through melodies. You know, everyone's not going to be a great sight reader, but compare the note with the chord and get an idea of the melody under those chords and get an idea of what the composer was thinking about. It also gives you an idea of how to improvise because, you know, the great players, they know how to play melodically, play off the melody. So what I would work on every day and what I try to work on every day is I still work on intonation, playing my arpeggios, 2 and 3 octaves really slowly. You work on your scales, get your technique, your right hand and left hand, and then you learn tunes. You should learn them by ear as much as possible, even if you're just learning Mary Had a Little Lamb. Learn how to pick that melody up by ear and find where it sits on the melody, sits in the scale. And, you know, that sort of thing. I mean, I work on stuff like, I had to plug in my computer, so it's in a different place. But I'll work on technique. You know, the bass is hard to play. So, you know, some guys like to play with 2 fingers. I like, you know, and then I might use a different technique here. So, you know, just simple stuff like that. Playing an arpeggio and play each note twice, play it 3 times, 4 times. Somehow that kicks in. But, you know, I like to, you know, you work with a metronome, but my basic stuff every day, I still work on my arpeggios and try to learn, you know, learn melodies either by ear or I might read them to get me going if it's a tune I'm not familiar with. But I can't think of any, like I can't think of a method book I would recommend. You know, Ray Brown's, he only did one. It's a great book. I also found out he uses his 3rd finger, which I also do. I didn't know that till I got the book. You know, but basically that scales, arpeggios, and melodies, and learning different styles. You know, keeping your ears open.
Absolutely, that's something that Milt Hinton said. You know, like keeping your ears open all the time. Do you have a special technique like for warming up before the show?
Yeah, it's real easy. I mean, it's nothing fancy. It's since I'm using all 4 fingers with my left hand, I'll just play a G major. That's not all I do, but my basic thing I might play is a G major scale, and then go up to the 4th. So what I'm doing is I'm getting all 4 fingers in the I'm doing that, and I can't remember what you call it. And because I sometimes solo with 3, I'll do stuff like just stuff like that. Get it up faster, and just to get warmed up, because you know it gets the tendons moving and your muscles warmed up. And then I can't remember what you call this, but when you're doing this, sorry, I can't remember what that's called. I'd like to, anyway, I like to do that. It's not real musical, but it kind of the bass is a strength instrument, so it kind of gets everything warmed up and keeps my hand big. Except for S sharp, that's the biggest stretch on the instrument. Just stuff like that, you know.
Do you ever have a problem with the feedback?
Not really. I mean, with Danny especially, we were real loud. At one point I ended up with an SVT behind me, and the reason I think is that it was always important for me to keep my action up and make sure I was generating the sound acoustically first and then amplify that. Do you know what I'm saying? So
yes,
I do plug in and then turn the amp up until I'm loud enough. I make sure that I'm playing as hard as I can without killing myself, and then amplify that. Does that make sense? So I'm just amplifying what I'm already doing acoustically. And somehow, I mean, every once in a while there would be like a certain note that comes out funny, but generally it works out okay if I do that. I haven't really I've never had to plug up the F holes or anything like that.
Oh, okay. So that's what I was wondering. You know, some different bass players have like a different technique, like for fighting the feedback.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite way to record your bass?
Oh yeah. Well, I do have a realist pickup, you know, one of those David Gage realist pickups, and I got it because that's what Dave Holland uses. I thought, well, if he uses it, I've never bought anything because of an ad before, but so I bought that. That records real nice. Sounds like a decent microphone, but I forgot the name of it because I just used one Thursday. But you know, I'd rather record with a nice kind of a ribbon type microphone. And from Billy Hancock, I don't know if you've heard of Billy talking about rockabilly. Billy Hancock was a great singer, electric bass player, guitar player, but he liked to mic the bass from behind, near the bottom, and in front, just below the bridge. And I usually do that. And then he might record getting some of the string sound on top. And I've done that before. It sounds real cool. But basically, just a microphone below the bridge pointing up so it's not in the way of the bow, you know. But I usually take it direct too. The David Gage pickup works real well for me. And that's what I use live. I just plug into an amp if I need to.
And do you use David Gage's realist for live shows as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so you don't have a feedback problem with that pickup? Like even when you play with the drummer and loud volume?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Pretty loud. I'm not trying to sell anything, but I use an Aguilar head with two, I think they're 10-inch. Wait a minute. I think they might be 12-inch speakers with an Aguilar head with 500 watts. It's not real powerful, but we get pretty loud. I keep it on the floor. I don't stack it up behind me. But generally, it's fine. I don't really have a problem.
We had a question from one of the viewers, and he asked if we're both using metal strings. For me, I usually do use metal strings, but on this bass, this is not. But what is the brand that you use? What is the model you use?
Well, my B and G they're Lenzner guts, and really my ENA or D'Addario Zyx. They blend real well at the go. But I think these are Lenzner's. I have a box of strings and I forget what they're called, but pretty sure these are Lenzner's. And like I said, I used the Dario Zyx with the E and A, and they blend well. They slap nice. Yeah. So when I got this bass, it had guts on it, and I just fell in love with it. So yeah, I like the gut.
How often do you have to change the mix?
I don't really change them very much. Usually, it's really hard to say. I mean, these have been on here at least a year. Sometimes the G string starts getting a little funny, gets kind of buzzy, but and I'll change it. But I don't change them a whole lot. I used to have a D and G that were from the 30s, and I lost them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were great, and they were perfect. They've been oiled. You're supposed to use almond oil or olive oil to keep them cured or whatever. And if you do that, usually they'll last forever. They don't go away. They're great. But yeah, I change them every now and then. Not very often. Like
how many basses do you have?
Well, I own 3 uprights. I do 3 uprights. I've got a 50s K. I don't know if let's see. This is the first bass I ever played. Back when I really didn't know how to play it. Obviously, it was my first bass. Arnold Taylor, he was an Episcopal Reverend, became one of my best friends, like a second dad to me. He taught me my first song on there. It was called Mountain Dew. He was a tenor banjo player, great singer. And anyway, he taught me my first song on this, and then he gave it to me in the early 90s. And it had guts on it, like they were really old. It's a 1950 K, so that's kind of neat. And then this one, the one in the corner, Paul Reed Smith gave me that. It belonged to his father-in-law, that he had played with Tommy Dorsey and Glenn Miller. And I guess he used it. It needs some work. The neck needs to be reaffixed. And it looks like a 5/8 to me. I don't even think it's a 3/4. And that thing in the middle, that's a Mando bass. That's not mine, though. I play at the Baltimore Mandolin Orchestra when we can, and sometimes they own it and they let me use it. So that's kind of cool. So.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that you usually use Aguilar heads and cabinets.
Yeah.
Okay, so besides that gear, besides the bass and a pickup and an amp, do you ever use any kind of pedals or effects?
I have a volume pedal.
When do you use a volume pedal?
Just to set it. I'll tell you why I started back when I used to. It was with Danny when I would switch between upright and electric. It was easier just to kick the pedal off and unplug rather than reach back and turn the volume down on the amp. So that's why I started using it. And, I can control my volume without having to take my hands off the bass. That's mostly why I have it, So, yeah.
And you have your bass with you. Can we hear a little bit more of your playing? Hopefully, including more slap in your particular style.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I have a tune worked up that way, but
whatever you feel like. Whatever you feel like, as long as you want it.
Well, but we're playing on the changes of Honeysuckle Rose, so. nice hat. I'm going to start over. I'm thinking of something else. Sorry about that. A little bit rough.
It's awesome. I really love your playing, and
Oh, thank you. I feel
hopefully you're going to be playing more and more slap. You know, you have a unique approach, and I enjoy hearing it. You know, we've been talking for 2.5 hours. I hope I covered, like, you know, most of it from your, you know, your career. Is there anything that you would like to add? Is there any projects that are coming up? What's the next thing happening?
What is the next thing? I got something. I'm not. My only live gig I have coming up is usually play once a month at NIH, National Institute of Health. They do. They have a concert series there, so that's kind of a neat thing. That started with Chris Vidala, the great sax player. He taught at University of Maryland. He played with Chuck Mangione and lots of people. We lost him a year and a half ago or so, and we started with him, and we keep it going. So, as far as projects, working on some stuff at Asparagus Media. The owner, Steve Steckler, and just blanked out on Robert's last name. I'm such an idiot. Anyway, we're doing some tunes, and they're on YouTube. You can look that up, Asparagus Media. And I don't have any big project right this minute. I know we're going to do a Blues Alley live stream in February. Let me take a look at my calendar. Yeah, I'm not sure when. Anyway, we got something coming up, but I'll have to keep you apprised. But mostly just playing at home and teaching and keeping it together somehow.
What is the best way for people to get in touch with you if they want to get some lessons?
I think the way you got hold of me with that Facebook Messenger, that's great. You know.
All right, let me just feature that one more time. Yeah. And there's a direct link in the description of the video if they want to get in touch with John.
All right.
This is we just had a earthquake here.
Oh my God.
Okay, it's over. There've been like over 100 earthquakes the last 2 weeks here in Croatia, and it's crazy. It's crazy. I just got used to it. It's funny because I live in California, in Los Angeles. I don't think we ever experienced this many earthquakes in such a short period of time. Some of those were pretty bad. I don't think that this one was that bad, but it was shaking. All right, I have one more question, and I would really like to thank you for being a part of the Slap stream and for keeping the Slap tradition alive through the whole of your career. And thank you for your wonderful playing and for being here with us. And my last question is, what inspired you to still do what you do?
Well, every morning I thank God for being alive, and I offer him everything I do. I remember reading about Johann Sebastian Bach, that he did everything to the glory of God, and I try to do that too. So I just give him all the works of my hands, and hope the Holy Spirit guides me how to play and be a blessing to people. But that's the main thing. Of course, my wonderful wife and my wonderful daughter and our family, and all my wonderful friends that I play with. It's a mighty blessing. It's really great. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Thanks so much, John. Good luck to you. Good luck with everything. And I really hope I'm going to be able to see you play live somewhere sometime soon.
And you too. I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. All right, guys. That was the end of the 31st Slap stream with Djordje live from Slapsville. Thanks so much. If you haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button, slap that subscribe button, and slap that like under the video as well. And please ring the bell, so you can get actually all the notifications. And if you would like to support the channel, please check out the Venmo and PayPal links in the description, and check out the Patreon. I offer some pretty cool perks over there. And I would actually like to give a shout out to the Patreons, to the latest one, Jake Taylor. Thanks a lot, Jake. And also Dan Rondeau, Josue, Arana, Etienne, Rouzet, Mikey, Paul Moomaw, Evill, Richard Tralles, Scott Owen, Bob Cullen, Kurt Ribak. If you're not on our email list and you would like to be, please send an email at contact@artofslapbass.com. And don't forget, never fret. Slide it in smooth and keep it in the groove. This is Djordje, and I'll see you next Saturday.